In this video, we are going to implement a simple tank movement that allows us to rotate our tank chassis, move forward and backwards, and rotate our turret with a small delay towards our mouse. This video is part of the series of videos about creating a 2D top-down tank game. We will explore different features of this game, each as a standalone video. Hi, I'm Peter, and welcome to Sunny Valley Studio Tutorials. In the previous video of the series, we have created our tile map, consisting of ground, details, obstacles, and some more details. I have also here some of the sprites for the tanks. There will be a link in the description with a package containing exact same project as I have here with the same CC0 licensed sprites and audio sounds, so that now we can use some of those sprites to create our tank. We have our tanks with a turret attached to them, but we can also create our own turret and our own tank chassis. And that's what we are going to do. First of all, we want to create in the hierarchy a game object, so let's right click, create an empty game object, let's call it player. Okay, inside it we are going to right click, create an empty game object, let's call it tank. Okay, inside our tank we are going to create yet another game object, so let's right click, create, and let's call it tank base. And on our tank base we are going to add component sprite render, and now we can attach a sprite to it. So let's select one of the tank bodies from our retina, from our sprites, and I'm going to select the tank body green, for example, and I will need to set the sorting layer to be of layer player. We have prepared those layers in the previous episode of this series, and now we have our tank, and this is visible on in our scene view. So first of all, we will need to get an input from our player. So to do that, we are going to go to our player game object, and we are going to add here a script. So let's create in our assets folder a new folder, right click, create a folder, and let's call it scripts. And inside here I'm going to create a new script, so right click, create C# script. I'm going to call it player input. Okay, I'm going to open it up in Visual Studio. Great, we are in our player input script. And what I would like to have here is I would like to have the update method, so I will delete the start method. And now, in our update, I would like to get the input for the tank movement, so this will be the arrow keys, for example, or WASD for the movement. I will want to get the input from the player about shooting the turret, as well as I want to move our turret using the mouse, so the mouse positions should lead the turret in the direction we want to shoot. So I'm going to create three methods. First one will be get body movement. Second one will be get turret movement. And third one will be get shooting input. Okay, to create those I will right click, quick action, and generate method, or I can alt enter and generate the method, so to use this help menu to create those methods for me. But before we can fill in those methods, the player input will only be responsible for getting the input from the player, but it will not be able to use it as such. I want to pass this input further down the line to whoever wants to get the message about the input. So to do that, I will want to use Unity events. Let's take a look at the documentation. Unity events are a great feature of Unity that allows us to create event-driven architecture. So we can expose an Unity event as a property or as the field of our class, and we can call on it invoke. And in addition to that, we can also pass to it arguments of any type we want. So for example, we can pass an int value, and we can assign any function or method from another class to be listening to a public event. And thanks to it, we can pass the information from one class to another by simply attaching the events. And those work exactly like, for example, for a button in Unity. Here I am back in our project. I have created a canvas and a button. So to attach to it any functionality, we simply create an event. We drag an object, for example, our player tank, and we can call on any method that is public on any component of it. So for example, game object and set active to false. So clicking the button will set the the player to be disabled. Okay, we are back in our player input script. I will create our event, so public Unity event. And we do not have those imported as libraries, so I'm going to click Alt Enter, or you can simply right click, quick actions, and you should be able to say using Unity event engine.events. It will place using statement at the top of your file, and we are using the events library. And for our shooting, we are simply going to create on shoot equals new Unity event. Now for the body movement and turret movement, I want to send the vector 2s indicating the movement direction and the mouse pointer position for our turret movement. So I will create public Unity event, and I will pass in triangular brackets vector 2 indicating that I will send a value of type vector 2 through our event. I will create on move body, and I will say that it is equal to new Unity event. And I can copy the same statement for the turret. So I will create on turret movement or move turret. Okay, save it. So for example, for our get shooting input method, I will simply call if our input get mouse button down, and I will search for mouse button 0, which is the left mouse button. And if this is true, if we are clicking the left mouse button, I will call on shoot. I will add a question mark to check whether anybody is listening to this event or this event is null. And then if this is not null, we can call dot invoke, and it will invoke this event. Now I have filled the remaining methods. Our get turret movement needs to get the mouse position. So we are going to call onMoveTurret event question mark dot invoke, and we are going to pass a vector 2. And our method getMousePosition will return simply vector 2 that we can pass to our event. Now in our getMousePosition, we are simply getting the input.mousePosition as vector 3. We are going to set the z value to main camera.nearClippingPlane. And since we need to access the main camera, and accessing camera.main only works if our camera is tagged as main camera, we are going to get the reference to our main camera at the top of our class in awake, and here I'm getting the camera.main, but we can also assign it since this is a serialized field. So when we get the access to our main camera, we can then get the position of our mouse. We can set the mouse position.z to the main camera near clip plane, and then we can convert it from the screen position to world point, since our mouse position is on the screen and we want to get this position in the world space. So we are using the main camera.screen to world point, and we are passing the mouse position that we got from the input system. And we are returning this as the vector 2 value. And we are going to call it in our onMoveTurret. Next, we are going to get the body movement, and we are going to simply get the vector 2 from input.getAxis horizontal and input.getAxis vertical, and we are going to call onMoveBody, and we are going to invoke it passing the movement vector.normalized form so that we do not go much faster when we are going in the diagonal direction. Make sure that you save the script, Ctrl S, and let's go back to Unity. Okay, I have dragged the player input onto our player game object, and as you can see, we can assign our main camera, and we have our events. Now we can add an event, and we can assign anything that we want to those inputs. Now, to be able to move our tank, we will need to have a script that will listen to those events. But before that, we want to go to our tank game object. We want to use a rigid body 2D component. So let's add to our tank game object a rigid body 2D component. And beside our rigid body, we want to add a capsule collider 2D. And it is important that it is a capsule, because when we are colliding with anything, it is circular, so it will not get stuck. Now, one issue we have is that our tank base is moved. The transform has different coordinates than the player position, or the tank position rather. So I'm going to click on our tank base, transform, and I'm going to reset it. So now if we click on our player, on our tank, the collider is matching our sprite. We can edit the collider and we can adjust the size of it so it matches better our tank body. it will be the collider that the bullets will hit to invoke damage on our tank. Great, I can select our player and move it a bit onto our map. One thing that we need to do with our rigid body to do is to set the gravity scale to be 0, because we do not want to see our tank fall down. Now, before we start implementing the tank movement, let's finish implementing the tank by creating a turret. So inside our tank game object, let's right click, create an empty game object, and let's call it tank turret parent. If we go to our inspector near the name, we can click this symbol to add a symbol here to know where we have this object. So it is in the center of our body, and if we rotate it, now it will be rotating in the center of our tank body. Now we can place inside this tank turret parent a new game object, and we can call it tank turret. And now what we can do is add here a sprite renderer, and we can select one of the turrets from our sprites folder. Maybe select this blue one. Okay, and I will need to select the sorting layer to be player, and I will set the order to be 1. Now, as you can see, our gizmo representing the tank parent is hiding our turret, so I will select the gizmos and I will decrease the 3D icon size. Great. So now we have our tank turret, and as you can see, it is not facing the correct direction because we have our y-axis above and red axis to the right, and we would like to steer it to point with the one of those axes. So what I will do is I will flip our sprite, our tank turret sprite, on y-axis, and now by selecting the tank turret we can move it around, but we are still rotating our tank parent. So if we move our tank parent to the middle of this area where our tank turret should be, and we move our tank turret a bit backwards, so now what we can do is we can simply select the tank turret parent and use the Z value for the rotation to rotate it around, and it should look pretty nice. Now we can see that our sprite is not visible in our game view. This is because our player's Z position is -25, which is behind the camera, so let's set it to be 0. So we have our turret and body of our tank ready. So what we will need to do is create another script. Let's create a script called tank controller. Okay, let's open it up in Visual Studio. Okay. Now, in our tank controller, we will need to assign some methods from this tank controller script to the Unity events on our player input. So we will need to create 3 methods that will be able to handle the input from our player. For our handle shoot, we are going to simply debug.log shooting, since we are going to implement the logic behind shooting mechanic in the next video. For our handle move body, we will need to create awake method, and we will need to get the reference to our rigid body 2D. Okay, so I have created awake, and I'm getting the reference to our rigid body 2D, and I have saved it under the name RB2D, get component of type rigid body 2D. Since tank controller will be attached to our tank game object, we will be able to get the reference to our rigid body 2D without any issue. Now, since we want to use rigid body 2D, we will need to have an fixed update, because it is safest to modify the rigid body in a fixed update. Now we will need to get the reference to our movement vectors, so we will need to save this movement vector that we get in the handle move body in a field. Okay, so we have our vector to movement vector, and we are going to save to our this dot movement vector equals our movement vector, and we have our max speed, that is public float value, that we will be able to assign. Now we need to know in which direction should we be moving. We are back in Unity, and I will select the tank base. As you can see, our sprite is facing the upwards direction or the downwards direction, depending on how you want to interpret the sprite. I will say that it is pointing in the upwards direction. So let's go back to our script. Okay. And in the fixed update, we are going to say rigidbody2d.velocity. We are going to set the velocity to be vector2transform.up, which is simply the green axis of the transform. We are converting it to vector2 since we do not care about the z value. We will multiply it by movement vector.y since we want to know if we want to go forward or backwards. we're going to multiply it by max speed and by time.delta time, or we can use the fixed delta time just to be more precise. Now this will allow us to move up and down, but it doesn't allow us to rotate. So we will want to go up and create a public float rotation speed. Let's set it to be 100, for example. And now in our fixed update, we will want to use rigidbody2d.moveRotation, which is a method that allows us to rotate our rigid body. And we are going to use transform.rotation, which is the rotation of our object currently. And we are going to multiply it by quaternion.Euler. And we are going to create a new angle using our movement vector x times rotation speed times time.fixed delta time. And we are going to take the movement vector.x with a minus here. And this is just because the way Unity rotates objects, we want to have minus so that we press a right arrow and we are going to rotate in a clockwise direction. So let's save it. Let's go back to Unity. Okay. I have already dragged the tank controller script onto our tank game object. And I will set the max speed to be something like 70 maybe, and rotation to be something like 200. And now what we will need to do is go to our player object, and we have our events. So let's add onShoot, let's drag our tank as the object. Let's select the function tank controller, and we should have handle shoot. Let's create for our onMove body again another listener. Let's drag our tank, and we are going to select tank controller, and at the top we have methods that actually take a vector 2. So we will select the handle move body, and for the on movement turret, let's again assign tank, and let's select the correct method, handle turret movement. Now if we press play, we should be able to control our tank, and you can see that it is driving using the up and down arrows, and it is rotating using left and right arrows. So this should work pretty fine. Now last thing that we will need to implement is the turret movement, and if we click our mouse, our left mouse button, you can see shooting debug.log statement appearing. So let's implement our turret movement. So let's go to our tank controller, and for our handle turret movement, first of all we will need to get the direction from the transform.position towards the mouse pointer, so we will know where we should rotate our turret. Next, we will calculate the desired angle of rotation, and we are going to use mathf.atan2 to calculate the angle between the turret direction.y and turret direction.x values, and we are going to convert it to degrees. So this will give us the angle by which we should move, or rather rotate, our turret. Now next step, to create the smooth rotation, so the tank rotates with some delay, so the tank turret rotates with some delay towards our mouse pointer, we are going to calculate the rotation step using the time.delta time and turret rotation speed variable, which I have created at top of our class, public float turret rotation speed equals 150. And last thing that we will need to do is actually rotate our turret. So to rotate our turret, we will get access to the turret parent transform. I have created public transform turret parent, and we are going to assign it through the inspector. So to get the correct turret direction, we are going to, instead of getting the transform position, we're going to call turret parent.position, and we are going to calculate the correct direction. Next, we are going to create the desired angle. Rotation step is calculated correctly, and we are going to change the rotation of our turret parent using quaternion.rotate towards, which creates a rotation between two rotations. First rotation is the turret parent.rotation, so the current turret rotation, and the second rotation is the quaternion.Euler, and here we have the desired angle that we want to rotate around. And last parameter that we are going to pass here is the rotation step, which is basically the speed of our rotation. So we are going to calculate it, and hopefully our turret will rotate with a small delay. Let's Ctrl S to save the script. Let's go back to Unity. Okay, let's select our tank, and we need to assign our tank parent transform. So I'm going to select tank turret parent, assign it as the turret parent, and we have all the parameters set. So let's click play, and now we should see that our turret is rotating and it is not rotating correctly. So why is that? This is because our turret, if we select it, and our turret parent is facing Y direction, but the rotation is according to the red axis, so the X axis, not the Y axis. So we will need to add a compensation angle to this so that we get the correct rotation. So let's go back to our script. Okay, I am in the handle turret movement, and we are going to add to our desired angle minus 90 degrees. And this will allow us to compensate the rotation from the Y axis to the X axis. Now this is a quick fix. We're going to create a better solution in the next video. So let's save it. Let's go back to Unity. Okay. Now I'm going to press play, and now our compensation should make our turret point in the right direction. And as you can see, there is a small delay between when we move our mouse and our turret handles the rotation. So this is in accordance to the speed that we have passed in our tank controller. So this concludes our movement of our tank. In the next video, we are going to refactor our code, because right now our tank controller is responsible for too many things. It is moving the tank base and tank turret parent. We do not want one script to handle everything that is happening in our game. So in the next video, we are going to fix it. If you want to support me, please take a look at my Patreon website. Check out my Udemy course about creating a 2D top-down shooter using the URP and Unity 2020. There will be a link with a discount in the description if you are interested. Thanks you for watching, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode of this series. Take care!